Hi, my name is David, and in this tutorial I will explain skeleton labeling fibers and how to do that in WEBKNOSSOS. Let's get right into it. Once your account is activated, you should land on a page that looks something like this. There are two data sets. In this tutorial I'm going to take you into scroll 5. To begin a new annotation, you click the New Annotation button under Actions. This creates an annotation file and launches you into the data. Before we do anything, let's take a look at what we have here. If you zoom all the way out, you can see a full scroll, the YZ and XZ cross sections, as well as the XY cross section through the middle. So what we're looking at is a papyrus scroll, and the sheets of the papyrus were made with two layers of papyrus strips, one layer of vertical strips and one layer of horizontal strips. These were hammered together to create a squarish sheet, and then you glue or hammer a bunch of those together to form these school bus long scrolls. So those sheets are the spiral. That's where the spiral comes from. That's the sheets that are wrapped around each other. And at this micron scale, this process seems to have merged the fleshy parts of the papyrus, while the fibers remain on either side of that fleshy papyrus. And we'll get into exactly what the fibers look like in this data, but the fibers remain on either side, sometimes separate, sometimes embedded, and we want to make use of them to unroll the scrolls. But let's back up a little bit. Visualizing the X-ray data, you can do it in a couple different ways. You can adjust the contrast by clipping the histogram with these sliders. You can use the gamma correction, which does something similar. You can invert the colors if that looks better to you. It's really whatever your personal preference is for visualizing the data. To move around, you click and drag to pan in each plane. Control and wheel to zoom. And also I and O are the keybinds to zoom. And scroll wheel by itself inside each of these windows pushes that plane forward and backward, as do the keybinds D and F. I'm mentioning these keybinds because later we're going to look at different view modes, and in those view modes the functions on the scroll wheel don't work, so you have to use I and O to zoom, as well as D and F to push the plane forward and backward. But going back to orthogonal for now, in orthogonal mode you're going to want to hide the planes in plane display mode. That'll let you visualize the fiber labels a little bit better. And the coordinates of the crosshairs are shown up here. And then the other part we're going to want to pay attention to are the tabs on the right here. The main ones we're interested in are info, which is where we'll put the name of our annotation, skeleton, that will be the list of all the fibers that you label, and B boxes or bounding boxes. And this is actually where we're going to start, because we want to define our target cube. So we'll do that now. We'll pick somewhere to start our cube. That looks like it's assigned coordinates already, but we're going to change those. And to stay organized, we're going to choose something that's an even multiple of 500. So maybe something like 4,000, 2,000, what does that put us? And 10,000. Sure. So we're going to copy those coordinates over to the first three entries of the bounding box. And then the other three entries are the width, height, and depth. We're going to start with, in this example, at 250, but depending on how that cube goes for you, we'll eventually try to move up to 500 or stick to 250 if the region is particularly difficult. So we're going to call that the full cube, but I also find it helpful to define subcubes within that cube. So the first one of which would be the same origin starting point, but then half the height, width, depth. So 125, 125, 125. Oh right, and you're probably going to want to change these colors to something a little brighter. Whatever you find stands out nicely against this grayscale papyrus. Alright, and one other helpful thing about bounding boxes is if you're just kind of moving around the data and you happen to get lost, you can always come over to your bounding box and click on it to center yourself back within those cubes. Yeah, so there'll be 8 of these subcubes, which fills out the rest of the full cube. Just to make another one to show you that. You can call it whatever you want. I like to call it with 1s and 0s. So this one would be the same thing, but the start, or the origin point of the box would be 125. And yeah, that puts 1 next to it there. But I'm going to hide that for now, because we're going to work in the first subcube to get started. Now that we've picked our cube, we can now name our annotation, because the naming is based on the coordinates of the cube you're working on. So we're going to call that fibers, S5 for scroll 5. If it was 1A, we'd call this 1A. And then the Z, Y, and then X, the opposite order. And that's just because it's easier to sort it by Z first. So 10,000, Z, what was it, 2,000, Y, 4,000, X, and then we're also going to keep track of a version number. Anytime someone maybe downloads it or edits it or for any reason, that's when you would increment this, but for now we're just going to leave it at version 00. Okay, press enter to save that. Yeah, so now our cube is defined, and actually now that means we can enter our script. A script written by Elion, one of our annotators. And what that does, it will add a bunch of keybinds. I'll send you this text file, but basically once you have it, you're going to download it, and then come down to this bounding box section, and we're going to edit that with our own values. So this cube here is 4,000, but we're also going to subtract 6, and I'll explain why a little bit later. But subtracting 6 from 2,000 puts it at 1994, and then 994. And also we're going to add 12, so if the box is 250, it'll be 262. So basically we're trying to stay organized with nice round cubes of 500 or 250, but in practice we want to be using cubes that are 256 or 512 powers of 2. So we're actually adding a buffer around the bounding boxes that we've defined, and we're going to label our fibers through those buffers, from out of one side through to out of the other side. We'll get back to that later. So once we have this script edited, we're going to copy the entire thing, and then go to Menu, Add Script, paste, and there we have. Now we have various keybinds, and there's a list of the keybinds. Most of these are scripted in, but some of them are the WEBKNOSSOS defaults, and I'll send you a link to this as well so you have it for reference. Okay, so now that that's all set up, let's find some fibers to label. So the point of the subcube was that we're going to try and find all the fibers within that subcube before we move to the next one. And that way, even if we're partially done the full cube, we might have some useful training data in the subcubes because they're complete already. So we're looking for objects of a particular size. That's one that's kind of standing out to me now, but that's not in the bounding box. Or is it? No, not the subcube anyway. I think there's one here. That could be a fun one to label for practice. So once we find a fiber, or our target fiber, take my word for it right now that this is a fiber, but we'll explain more later. We're going to follow it by eye until we're more than 6 voxels outside of our cube. So we're well below that margin now. And then click on skeleton, and this is where we're going to start, or this is where all our fiber labels will be. So you want to create a new tree for every fiber. You can do that by clicking the plus button or pressing C. And then once you have this kind of active tree, you can use A to place a node where your crosshairs are located. So I'll do that there. And then we're going to move a little bit. This is an important point because you can accidentally go the opposite direction from your cube, and you might end up labeling the fiber a really long way in the wrong direction, all for nothing. So make sure your second node is placed closer to the cube than your first one. Place that there. And now we're going to move to oblique mode to label the rest of this fiber. So you can get to oblique mode a couple different ways. You can just click using this view mode button. Shift 1, Shift 2, and Shift 3 are all keybinds that will take you to orthogonal, flight, or oblique mode, respectively. And also there's the M keybind, which will just cycle through each of these modes. But I like to use Shift 3 to jump straight to oblique mode. And once you're in oblique mode, the active node, which is the node you placed last, will show up as a circle and of a different color. And that's important because that means the next node that you place will be connected to that active node. So let's try and label this fiber. We want to. So right now I'm using D and F to push the plane forward and backward, and when looking at scroll data, I like to tell everyone that it's kind of like a fence with small gaps. If you're standing still, you can't really see anything, but when you start walking or running, you can see the entire backyard. And that principle applies to the scroll data. So move around a lot, try to visualize where the fiber is going. We'll see this notification telling us that we've placed the node outside the bounding box, which is where we want to start. We want to start outside, go through the box, and then get to the outside of it again. That pop-up is defined by the script that we just entered, so that includes the buffer of 6 on each side that we wanted to include. Okay, so let's try and label the rest of this fiber. We want to do our best to stay. Well, it appears I might have gone off track there. So you can use T to delete nodes. And then you want to do your best to stay in the middle. It's not always easy. Again, running instead of staring at the fence is the technique. That'll let you see this data a bit better. There's the fiber. So sometimes the fiber will be embedded in the sheet, and you just kind of have to interpolate where you saw it before, and you see where the rest of the sheets are going, and then you see it separate again after, and then you just have to kind of fill in where it went. It's getting a little clearer now, which is nice. Alright, and then I think it jumps back up there. Where did it go? It comes back down again. see through the blur a little bit. Ah, yeah, it's headed this way now. Okay, and now you see this pop-up telling us we've made it through the full cube. So that tells us that we're done with this fiber. We can go back to orthogonal mode by Shift 1 or M. And there we can see our fiber. And you'll notice that, and this was on purpose, that even though we're trying to find all the fibers in the subcube, once we have them, we're going to continue them all the way through the full cube. So, yep, that goes through both. Looks like, as we knew it would be, it's more than 6 voxels outside on both ends. So now we can go back to our subcube and look for another fiber. I find it helpful to, so remember there's horizontal fibers and vertical fibers. In XY it's usually the vertical fibers that you're going to see as these rectangle shapes, but the horizontal ones will be in the YZ or XZ. It really depends where you are in the scroll. If we were on the left side, then the YZ plane would be kind of nonsense, but we'd see the fibers in the XZ plane. But currently we're working where the papyrus is horizontal, so the orthogonal plane to that is the YZ plane. You just have to kind of pick whichever one is more clear to you. So one way that's helpful or one strategy that's helpful for finding fibers is to look for these streaks of light. So if you see as I push the plane forward and backward, there's this streak that follows along this sheet. And if I center my crosshairs where the streak is brightest and then go to the orthogonal plane, you'll see that there is actually a fiber. Not a very obvious one, but actually, yeah, that is pretty obvious. Right here. So again, we're going to make sure that we follow it until we're outside of the cube. So we're at 3976 of x, which is more than 6 away from 4000. And now you want to make sure that you create a new tree before you place the next node, because the last active node is still on the first fiber, and I'll just show you what happens if you place a node now without creating a new tree. See, that's not what we want. We don't want these two nodes connected. So if this happens, and it often does where you forget to create a new tree, what I would recommend is first create a new tree, place your node, and then go back to the one that you placed in error, and then delete it with T. If you don't do that, then sometimes it'll throw your crosshairs back to the last active node, and then you've completely lost the fiber that you spent all that time trying to find. But anyways, we have this one now labeled properly, and you click on it to make it the active node, and then we move towards our full cube, place one more node, and then jump into orthogonal mode with Shift 3. And now you'll notice that the default for oblique mode, the default plane for oblique mode is XY, but we have keybinds to jump to each of the 3 planes that are in orthogonal mode. There's X, which jumps you to YZ, Z jumps you to XZ, and then W will bring you back to XY. I kind of just push whichever one, because I can never remember which one it is, until it looks like the view I saw in orthogonal mode, and then I know I'm in the right place. So now that we have the same thing we had before, we push it in the direction where the active node is the last one we see, push it a little farther, and then we'll see that we're still placing nodes outside the bounding box, which is where we want to start, but now we're not. Oh, and sometimes if the node is not showing up, this line appears above the data, and sometimes we're just looking at the data from the wrong side. So you can flip your view using R. And now we're looking at from basically behind what we were looking at it before. So now when we place a node, yeah, we're going to see the view that we expected. Alright. So I'm going to label this one as well. This one's a bit confusing. I'm not sure if this entire thing is a fiber or if it's two fibers. Might be, actually it looks like it's all one fiber. So maybe I want to, okay, I did start in the middle and then I drifted towards the edge. So I'm going to delete the last couple. And then label that more towards the center of the fiber. So I'm just pressing F or D to push, and then A, and then just moving the crosshairs to where I want to place the node, and doing that over and over again along the fiber. Doing my best to keep both the node and the line connecting the nodes inside the fiber. Sometimes if the fiber moves, the whole point of oblique mode is that it's free to rotate, so you can use the arrow keys to rotate the plane. Make sure you center your crosshairs on your node, otherwise it is not going to rotate how you want. So just use the arrow keys to make this line go in and out of the screen as much as possible, and that will square you up on that particular fiber. And move it again. Now I'm going to rotate again because it's bent out of plane again. Alright. There we go. And the pop-up tells us we've made it past the buffer and outside of our bounding box, so we're done. Yeah, so the fibers, that's basically it. You do it over and over again. Let's take a look at some fibers in different views just to... So often this is a pretty signature type of fiber where the fiber was probably a tube at some point before it was crushed, so the ends have kind of like a crushed garden hose where the ends would still be curved a little bit, but then it's squished in the middle. You see a lot of those. But then also sometimes it's just like the fibers, like this is a longer one, but sometimes they're smaller. Sometimes they're this size. The key is these little blobs or objects that persist even when you push the plane forward and backward quite a ways, and remain on one side of a sheet. Sometimes the fibers will bounce between a gap, but it won't pass through a sheet, for example. So yeah, remember so you can look for streaks of light in both. Let's go back to our bounding box. You can use that streak of light method in both planes. Well, we'll go outside of our box to find it, but yeah, so that landed us on a fiber in the XY plane. So yeah, that's it. I hope you found this video helpful. Now let's go label some fibers.